Chapter 11, Managing Conflict and Negotiating. This chapter's opening vignette shows how important it is to effectively manage conflict in organizations. After reading the material in Chapter 11, you should be able to define the term conflict and know the difference between functional and dysfunctional conflict. You should be able to define personality conflicts and discuss how to manage them. You should be able to discuss the role of in-group thinking and explain what can be done to avoid cross-cultural conflict. You should also be able to explain how managers can use functional conflict toward positive ends and be able to identify and describe at least 4 alternative dispute resolution techniques. Finally, you should be able to distinguish between distributive and integrative negation and explain the concept of added value negotiation. We begin with conflict. Conflict is inherent in all organizations. There are major trends at work that make it inevitable. These trends include constant change in the environment, significantly more employee diversity, trends towards using teams, technology that decreases face-to-face communication, and the increasing need for cross-cultural dealings in a global economy. Organizational views on conflict have evolved over the years. The modern or contemporary view of conflict defines it as a situation in which one party perceives that its interests are being opposed or set back by another party. Conflict takes on many forms. The form of conflict most often recognized or cited is personality conflict. Formally defined, personality conflict is interpersonal opposition driven by personal dislike or disagreement. It has been argued that personality conflicts underlie many problems in organizations. How do we deal with personality conflicts? Personality conflicts often affect more people than just the individuals having the conflict. This slide provides a set of tips for 3 different parties typically involved in a personality conflict: the employees who are having the personality conflict, the third-party observers to the conflict, and the managers whose employees are involved with the personality conflict. As you can see from the slide, direct communication is the underlying principle for addressing and resolving personality conflicts. We turn now to a discussion of intergroup conflict. Conflict can occur between individuals, between groups, and between divisions or departments within an organization. Intergroup conflict within organizations occurs among members of work groups, team members, and departments. Some conflict within these groups can be beneficial to the organization so long as it is functional. One reason why conflict can be a good thing on an intergroup basis is that too much cohesiveness can breed groupthink, because a desire to get along pushes aside critical thinking. The management of intergroup conflict is important to ensure organizational effectiveness. The level of perceived intergroup conflict tends to increase when conflict within a group is high or there are negative interactions between groups or group members. When these occur, managers need to work to eliminate the specific negative interactions between the parties involved. One thing organizations can do is to conduct team-building exercises designed to reduce intergroup conflict and prepare individuals to work more effectively in cross-functional situations. Managers should also try to minimize or neutralize gossip across groups or departments. Although we observe that some amount of intergroup conflict is potentially valuable to organizations, dysfunctional conflict, by definition, has negative effects. To effectively manage intergroup conflict, managers should be aware of the contact hypothesis, which states that the more the members of different groups interact, the less intergroup conflict they will experience. Through these various interactions, managers can identify and root out specific negative linkages between groups, so as to promote cooperation towards the attainment of organizational goals. Sometimes conflict occurs due to misunderstandings, miscommunication, or cultural differences. As this slide demonstrates, cross-cultural relationships can be developed and strengthened by following these rules. Try to be a good listener. Be sensitive to the needs of others. Cooperate rather than compete. Advocate participative leadership. Compromise rather than dominate. Build rapport through ongoing communications. Be compassionate and understanding. Try to avoid conflict by emphasizing harmony and nurture others. If conflict can be beneficial, as we've stated, what can we do when we need more of it? Functional conflict promotes organizational goals. An effective way to foster this type of conflict is through programmed conflict. Using programmed conflict, organizational members are encouraged to voice different opinions freely, whether or not they agree with management's positions. There are two methods used to foster programmed conflict. The first is the use of devil's advocacy, where someone is assigned the role of critic to encourage additional argument and information. The other method is called the dialectic method, where debate of opposing viewpoints is fostered so as to better understand an issue. How do devil's advocacy and the dialectic method work? This slide shows techniques for stimulating functional conflict using the devil's advocate decision program and the dialectic decision method. As can be seen, each method consists of 6 steps that begin with a proposed course of action being suggested and end with a decision and the monitoring of that decision. The intermediate steps are, however, markedly distinct. When conflict arises, what can we do? Here we consider 5 conflict handling styles. Each conflict handling style is identified by the combination of 2 factors, the concern for others and the concern for oneself. When an individual has a high concern for others and a high concern for self, an integrating style is adopted in which the interested parties confront the issue and cooperatively identify the problem, generate alternatives, and select a solution. This approach is most appropriate for complex issues that are plagued by misunderstandings. When an individual has a low concern for others, yet a high concern for self, a dominating style is used which relies on formal authority to force compliance. It is most appropriate when an unpopular solution must be implemented. If an individual has a high concern for others and a low concern for self, an obliging style emerges which involves playing down differences while emphasizing commonalities. This style is most effective when it is possible to get something in return for settling the conflict. Finally, when the concern for self is low and the concern for others is low, individuals will avoid the conflict altogether, either through passive withdrawal from the problem or active suppression of the issue. This may be appropriate when the issues are trivial in nature. Finally, compromising is a give-and-take approach that involves a moderate concern for both self and others. Compromise can be an effective strategy to handle conflict when the parties in the conflict have opposite goals. Neither party gets all of what they want, but both parties are able to gain something from the exchange. There are times when conflict occurs between 2 parties, such that they cannot resolve their differences and need the assistance of a third party. This third-party intervention is referred to as alternative dispute resolution. Formally defined, alternative dispute resolution, or ADR, is a process designed to avoid costly lawsuits by resolving conflicts informally or through mediation or arbitration. The process of ADR can take on many different forms. Organizations have used the following approaches in alternative dispute resolution: facilitation, conciliation, peer review, ombudsman, mediation, and arbitration. We now turn our attention to the negotiation process. During conflict resolution, or ADR, negotiations often take place to try to reach closure or compromise on the issues in dispute. Negotiation is the give-and-take process between conflicting independent parties. There are 2 primary types of negotiations: distributive and integrative. Distributive negotiations assumes a zero-sum outcome, where there is a distribution of a fixed set of resources or rewards. In integrative negotiations, the parties attempt to satisfy both of their needs simultaneously using a win-win framework as opposed to a zero-sum approach. A third type of negotiation, called an added value negotiation, seeks to cooperatively foster multiple deal packages while focusing on developing a long-term relationship between the parties. This involves clarifying interests, identifying options, designing alternative deal packages, selecting a deal, and perfecting the deal. This concludes the lecture on Chapter 11. Apply the concepts that you've learned in the end of chapter materials, such as the ethical dilemma, is Flagler Productions unfairly exploiting Walmart? And take a practice quiz on the Online Learning Center, www.mhhe.com/KINICKIOB4E.